So we're at 5:02. It looks like we've got nearly 50 people on the call. So I'd like to kick things off. I'm Kevin Klipstein, President and CEO of US Squash, and want to welcome you to the Community Squash Town Hall. Appreciate everybody calling in. We're really excited to come together to highlight our increased focus on community squash, answer everyone's questions about this initiative and its kickoff, and just some logistics here. Everyone except for the panelists will be muted for the first 20 minutes or so. We'll go around the horn once among the panelists, and then we'll open it up to questions. So you can either put in the chat questions that you may have, or raise your hand in the participant section, and we'll remind you about that as we open it up. So thank you again for joining. I'm really interested to hear what our panelists do have to say. Thank you, Hannah, Simba, Renato, and of course, Barrett Dekezian, who will actually moderate this session here tonight. Barrett's the founder of and president and senior executive director of Portland Community Squash, or PCS. PCS has been on the vanguard of community squash and building community for several years now. The program in Portland has 700 players, and they speak nearly 30 languages there collectively. It's probably the most diverse community in Portland, period. He's been an inspiration to us at US Squash, and now he serves in a senior advisor role to us in this community squash initiative. So Barrett, I was hoping that you could kick things off. It's only appropriate by taking a few minutes and just talking about the inspiration behind community squash and what it is in the first place.
Thank you, Kevin. And thank you, everyone, just watching the names in the chat and having everyone joining from around the country. It means so much to me personally and everyone that's been pushing for community access for the past years here in the US. Let's see where to start. So many of us have been doing community squash for decades. I mean, I just want to say thank you to every squash pro that's given a free lesson, or any member that let a kid that was knocking on the glass door to come in and hit around a little bit. I mean, community is what squash is all about. And when I started talking about expanding squash in Maine, we had a group of a dozen people together, and Greg Bourne was one of those people that took time to volunteer to run public clinics here in Maine on a couple racquetball courts. We grew our squash community here from a dozen in the state of Maine to, Kevin said, we've had 700 people on court, about 200 students. But community squash, it's not about one program. We're not prescribing one particular program over another. We just want to make sure that the neighbors in our communities have access to those programs. And so in the way I look at it, every court can be a community court. The question is, do we have the willpower to make sure that every neighbor feels at home within our squash facilities, whether they're indoors or out? And we have so many groups that are poised to join this community squash movement. All we're doing is putting a name on it. We're aligning our vision. But it doesn't matter what kind of organization you are, you're welcome in this movement. If you're a college facility that's thinking about opening up a couple junior clinics to kids in your town, if you're a private club that wants to start opening up access to your membership and some of your private lessons, if you're an SEA program that wants to start working with the parents of your students and bringing in the adult community, as long as you want to be bringing people in an inclusive way, you belong in this movement. And I view this session today as the beginning of vision alignment. Deciding what is important to us. We have started putting some real criteria behind this movement on the US Squash website. We're starting to formalize it, but in terms of our marketing effort and our vision alignment, it's just starting. So today you'll be hearing from some of the first facilities that have joined the Community Affiliate Network. These are facilities that are committed to access, and we hope we'll have 12 or so joining in the coming months, and I think we'll have a few hundred in the next year or so. So to kick things off, I'm going to go and introduce some of our panelists and have them discuss why they joined the Community Affiliate Network. And before I do that, I just want to say we're starting with some really basic criteria. The first affiliates are all nonprofits. They've all made a commitment to access. And we've announced 3 different levels of affiliates. Emerging, which has the most basic criteria, a nonprofit organization that has clear strategies to address financial aid, transportation, or inclusive marketing. From there, we have local affiliates, and Portland Community Squash is one of those. And at that point, there's a threshold about how much financial aid or access that you are providing your community relative to your overall budget. And then finally, we have our regional affiliates, which are in major regions where squash is spreading, that are focused not only on their own development, but the development of squash around them as well. And so for specific questions, feel free to ask specific questions about this community affiliate network. This is the first program in the community initiative and what we'll be focusing on primarily today. The details are on the website, but you'll hear from these various programs about why they decided to join this community squash movement. So I'm going to start with Renato, who's in San Diego and has been driving the way. Many of you know that California is one of the fastest growing regions for squash. And so I'm curious, Renato's always been a strong leader within the Squash and Education Alliance. And I'm curious about why Access Youth Academy decided to commit their facility to this community squash movement as well.
Thanks, Barrett. Good to see you and good to see so many faces today here. So first of all, I just want to say that I just love the word access being used a lot. It's our name, Access Youth Academy. So I think it fits a lot with this movement. And Barry, to answer your question, there's a few things that come to mind. First, the first one's collaboration. US Squash and SCA programs, of course, with Access, the close collaboration on how we were going to work together to do to serve the community better, not only low-income students, but everyone that wants to play. In our facility, we're going to have free PE programs to over 12 schools. We're going to have a lot of new initiatives, including wheelchair squash. So there's a lot of cool things happening. The second one's the growth of the sport overall. We are building 8 new courts in our new facility. To be able to use this only after school is a sin, in our opinion. So we are opening the courts from early in the morning to late at night. We are building this in a neighborhood that it's not a classic place where squash facilities are built, including some free memberships. We plan to have this open to everyone that wants to play, really. Credibility, US Squash, in my opinion, is the best run organization squash in the world. So to be able to partner with them is just an honor. And to wrap it up, I think we are actually, as you said earlier, we are part of a movement. This is actually what's going to make squash turn around and become a much better sport, potentially in the Olympics. But I do believe that the movement of access, it's critical for us, all of us. So we're very happy here in San Diego to be part of this movement.
Thanks, Renato. I'm sure we'll circle back to you. So exciting to hear. Hannah, I'd love to go to you. You're the program director for A+ Squash and Atlanta Community Squash. And I've gone down and I've seen your youth program down there. But what has it meant since you branded yourselves as a community squash facility? And what has it meant to have a facility, and how have you been able to adapt during this time of COVID as well?
Thank you, Barrett. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Simply put, if we hadn't have had our own facility when COVID hit, if we hadn't have had Atlanta Community Squash and a facility that we can be proud to call home for A+, we would not have been able to adapt to the COVID situation. We have worked Atlanta Community Squash and A+ Squash we've worked hand in hand to reopen the facilities, obviously extremely cautiously, but really with the focus to have the A+ kids be able to come back into the building, to be able to once again support them in this most difficult time, to be able to give back to the community, help the families. And then we've been able to take this to the next step, which is we've converted our after school program into a during the day program called the A+ Squash Learning Pod. And working hand in hand with Mark Heather, Atlanta Community Squash, we've converted the program to a during the day where we're literally picking up the students from home at 6:30, 7 a.m., bringing them into the building. And we've converted squash courts into classrooms. We've converted our classroom into a kitchen. We've built a massive tent in the parking lot. And so we've been able to utilize this facility to keep everybody safe. But there have been people from the Atlanta squash community, whether it's members, whether it's private schools, whether it's A+ kids. We have had people in this building, like I said, from 7 a.m. through till late in the evening, all the way through COVID. And I think that's the essence of community squash. And if we didn't have this facility, and if we didn't have this amazing squash community, we would not be able to offer this to the A+ kids and families. And they are eternally grateful. We've had so much fun, and it's just been such a bringing together of the community, really. It's been amazing.
Yeah, thank you for that, Hannah. You do remind me, these programs that we've designed over the years at US Squash and at SEA, they fit together so well. Atlanta's a great example, really engaged board that made the facility happen. Hannah and the program staff running a great youth program, and Mark Heather running a membership component as well. And it's probably true for Atlanta, but at least in Portland, we've seen 85% of our members have stayed with us paying month over month during the shutdown. And that's because they know that their membership doesn't just go towards me, to be frank. It goes towards this organization that's a second home to so many people across the community. And I'm glad you've been able to adapt down in Atlanta as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very unique time for, in fact, growth and expansion of the sport, but also bringing together in a way that is completely, we couldn't have expected this, but at any given time, because the A+ kids were in the facility 3 till 4 p.m. Some were eating at different times, or some were in the classroom at different times, or the squash courts different times. At any given time, there could be a member just coming to play. And even though we were following very strict COVID rules, there has been members playing hardball doubles, board members playing hardball doubles with 3 A+ kids once every week. Mm-hmm. It's given me the opportunity to walk up to members that are playing that I know have offered to volunteer to tutor the A+ kids, and to actually go right up to them and say, hey, we really need some help in geometry at the moment. I've got Ovante over here. Can you come in tomorrow and work under our tent, and be safe, but really help out? And that
intersections, exactly.
Correct.
I'm gonna go to Simba, because Street Squash is going through the process of joining the community affiliate network, and they've been doing a lot of these themes that you're talking about in Atlanta for years now. And I think Simba, why did this network speak to you and your vision for the team at Street Squash?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to follow Hannah's eloquent and very amazing program. Like the fact that people are coming in at 7 a.m. and leaving late at night is just spectacular in these times. So I was lucky to get the opportunity to work at Street Squash, having left like kind of the private club world, and I loved it there. But what we're doing at Street Squash is, in my opinion, a little bit more impactful. And in addition to what we're doing now, we are we're looking into like joining this affiliate network based on the fact that even though we've been doing a lot of these things in the past, whether it's having giving court access to like local schools, a local school, Sisulu Walker's a charter school right kind of across the street. It's been coming in for physical education for nearly a decade. Like, so it's stuff we've been doing, and now we just want to formalize it. And it speaks to me basically because I can learn from the people that have started it already, and add on to some of the services we have. There's a range of new and various kind of events and ways to use our courts that I'm kind of excited to explore with the help of Barrett and this amazing crew at US Squash. Barrett's so right. I've had the opportunity to work for US Squash as well, and it's without doubt the best squash federation in the world, like bar none. So just to have that combination is just a no-brainer for me and my organization.
That's great. I want to turn to Kevin now, but as we turn to Kevin, I'm curious, some viewer engagement. What are the most accessible courts in your city or region, and where can we expand access? Whether it's a racquetball court, are you dreaming of outdoor courts? Do you in your local city? I'd love to see just in the chat ideas to increase access across your various facilities and organizations. So while people dream about their local areas, Kevin, you and I have talked to, I know I've talked to at least 25 cities in the past year, people that have just found the story of Portland. And we've been doing the best we can to document and put ourselves in a position where we can share best practices. We finally have a lot of the tools at US Squash. We have a roster of squash professionals that are there to assist these programs too. I'm curious, why did US Squash decide to focus on access now, and why put a name and some branding and investment behind this movement?
Well, appreciate everyone's comments before, and in reality, innovation, as we all know, happens at the local level and in the community. So I just, the fact that these programs are willing to band together and set the examples and share best practices, starting with you, Barrett, is really incredible. I mean, the reason is pretty simple, that access is sort of our number one priority as an organization: access, community, excellence, and sportsmanship. And so we've really spent the last decade or more building out the infrastructure and the foundation that we've needed to be able to support that and support that growth effectively and in an enduring way. And I think hopefully you or others can speak to sort of how sometimes those behind the scenes tools can be really essential towards building a sustained and engaged community. But you know, so it's obvious, it's central to our mission, access. And not only access for those who can afford it under the current model, or access for kids in underserved communities with a focus on education, but really everyone in between. And the idea that all of those participants are together as one squash community is really a highlight and something that's very important to us as an organization. And how we got here was really, Barrett, you being in my office more than 5 or 6 years ago, my glamorous office on 38th Street in the Garment District, and describing what you were planning on doing, and us being really quick to say, we'll do whatever we can to support what you're doing. That's the vision for the future for this sport. And Renato Paiva and Blair Sadler, you know, probably a dozen visits from the West Coast, and always coming by to our office and give us an update on their vision for their program in San Diego, which is probably one of the least likely markets you would expect something like this to happen. So, and the same reactions, like, we'll do everything we can to support what you're doing. And Atlanta Community Squash, the folks, Brian Dyson, the late Eben Hardy, there are a couple really just incredible pillars of that squash community who for a long time have wanted to create essentially a publicly accessible squash facility. And you know, there's such a pent-up demand for this within the squash community. And so they came up and they shared our vision. They said, not only do we want to replicate what's going on in Portland, we want a formal connection with what you're doing here in Philadelphia at the Spectre Center, because we think that's a really powerful concept too. So linking all of those up in a tiered structure and in a network with a focus on access just seems obvious. And this is just about breaking down traditional barriers to build really diverse communities. And since then, we've provided tens of thousands of dollars of direct support to help make sure that those are success, but also those investments in the back end. And we're looking forward to opening our own community squash program and community squash facility ourselves at the Spectre Center in a federally designated promise zone. So, I wouldn't mind bringing in Ned Edwards. I think Ned's on the call. It's hard for me to keep track. But Ned is the executive director of the Spectre Center. He's been point on not only raising the money, but in the building design. We're seeing the construction and bringing on the general manager, and really ultimately has also pioneered the idea of our central role in driving community squash. So Ned, if you're out there, if
Yeah.
can unmute, great.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kevin. It's this call matters so much because the Spectre Center 9 months ago felt like something different. We were rushing to get it done for the US Open, which would have been held last month. We would have been hurrying through construction and then getting right into a junior season with a plan for 95 tournament days. And then the third, I guess the three pillars were these, the host site for major championships, allowing lots and lots of competitors to be under one roof, the training of Team USA, and then the community piece. And now with the quiet period that we've had in squash and the societal awarenesses that have been really come to the fore and the issues with college squash, the community piece has absolutely pivoted to the front of what we're doing. And so US Squash will have 20 courts at the Spectre Center to do the things that Barrett and Simba and Hannah and Renato are speaking about. And that fit with the SCA program is a very big deal, that we have an anchor in Squash Smarts and Stephen Nabila's program to build right up through the rest of society and in the middle, so that squash does look like the society at large. And so we will take all of the learnings from the people who are speaking on the panel, and it will be front and center. Mark Pagan a while ago had referenced a trip that his family took to Buenos Aires, and how the facility La Boca, the soccer stadium down there, was such a point of pride for this particular part of Buenos Aires. And since that conversation, Mark, one of our goals is to make sure that the Spectre Center is the point of pride for this area in West Philadelphia as well, and that people feel it's theirs, that the kids will get good, be proud of it. The community residents will be proud of the kids getting so good, and that suddenly this access will have created a new face for squash, and one that's crucial for really wholesome growth. But if we're going to have the kind of critical mass ultimately for the 2028 Olympic game bid. And the reason why I mention that is because for so many, when we talk about inclusion and taking the game more broadly, if the Olympic Committee says, wow, the squash is doing something here, and this is real in the community, and it's getting traction, imagine what it would mean to athletes to compete for the United States in squash, and who that would bring, how many people that would bring to the sport. So these are the kind of dreams that we have, and I feel that the Spectre Center is a community center, and I'm grateful for all the learnings of everyone on the call.
Thank you, Ned. Thank you, Kevin. I will say the thing I love about this movement, and the reason I'm really glad to dedicate some of my time to this project, is because the Spectre Center is a big community center. But just as important in this community affiliate network, we have a group. I remember getting an email from Justin Shields that was trying to convert one racquetball court in Richmond, Virginia, with a group of folks down there. And, you know, as a 22-year-old kid that wanted to get into this work, Greg Zaff was my mentor at Squash Busters. And I got a little bit discouraged at the age of 23 when I realized that I was going to need to raise $2 million for a facility and immediately jump into $1 million annual fund. And Greg brought me into the organization Squash Busters to teach me the youth development side of this mission. And Portland, sometimes constrained resources forced innovation. So we started conservatively. We started with little clinics at a YMCA on a racquetball court. And soon enough, we had 10 kids on the court. We had a boombox going. I told the kids every day, our program is a 2 out of 10. You know, just stick with us. We're building a community, just stick with us. Almost every one of those kids in 2013 stuck with us all the way until they just graduated from high school. And we just placed 16 kids in college. And the great thing about community squash is you build as you go. You put access, inclusion, equity at the center of your mission from day one. And as you get stronger, you can invest in the people in your community. And that's what I call equity. As our organizations gain strength, we can add wraparound services. In 2017, 4 years after we were founded, we had the financial strength to start our own Squash and Education Alliance program. And it's been transformative to the families in our program. But my hope is no matter how young an aspiring squash professional is, or how old, if you want to start humbly by just creating some programming, US Squash is going to be behind you. We're going to give you the marketing tools to do it. We're going to give you the technology to do it. We're going to share best practices across our network. We need to empower everyone that's passionate about this sport to use it to build community, because that's what our country needs right now. And we'll see where it goes. This is day one. This is day one. So I'll just open up to our panelists first. Is there anything that's really resonated? Renato, Simba, or Hannah, is there any remarks that you'd like to make before we go to general questions? I don't have any specific questions for you. I think
I could go. I just wanted to talk a little bit about court utilization and the things that I've seen when I first got to my program. When I first got to Street Squash, we didn't have programming on a Sunday. That to me I didn't get it. I didn't understand why. I mean, I've been teaching in private clubs for over a decade, and Wednesday was my day off, right? Like, it's not, you know, so I was just so shocked at that. And and then I watched as we started to develop other ways of using our courts. And now we're going to be a 7-day-a-week program, obviously, when we can open, but court utilization for me is like so important, because you can waste a lot of that great square footage if you don't really think through how to monetize it from a private, like maybe a client, like maybe we have a varsity program that plays out of our facility, or donating that space to a local charter school for free, you know? So it's just there's kind of some sort of balance you have to find, but for sure, like, I think court utilization is a massive one, and just making sure you continue to think about it in your processes.
Thanks, Simba. That's a great point. And if you join the network, Simba will give you some tips on how to do that.
If I can open my facility in New York.
I know. The present is tough. That's why we're focused on the future right now.
There you go.
Renato or Hannah, any last comments before we open up to questions?
I have one quick comment. I keep joking that squash in San Diego used to be beach volleyball in Alaska. It's just kind of like it wasn't a factor ever. But well, things have changed. In the same way you grew your program from the bottom up by saying stick with us, that we're gonna make it. It was the same thing here. I remember our first class. I felt very odd going to kids' homes and saying, "Hey, give us a chance to play this game." That's weird, but we're gonna make it through. And now 14 years into it, we've graduated with $8.6 million in scholarships. Half of the Ivy Leagues that have our students. So it can happen any location, correct? There was a professional squash player that was 75 in the world that came from an urban squash program in San Diego. That's all possible. So I urge everyone that has any ideas or any will to fight hard and to think about expanding your ideas and make it accessible. It's really, if we did in San Diego, anywhere is possible, correct? So I just agree with you on this.
Yeah, the other thing I love is that our story is so much bigger than squash too. It just this concept of access. I don't want to just lead the way for squash. I want the other sports chasing us. I want to see basketball taking away some transportation and financial aid barriers. I want to see theater, visual arts. There's something about leading the way and pioneering like you've done in San Diego, Renato, that just gives a movement energy. So, I want to be out in front and anyone else that wants to be out in front. Thank you. So let's open to questions. I might have planted 1 or 2 questions in the crowd. I don't know if they're with us, but if you could put your questions in the chat, raise your hands. Dent is with us from US Squash, and he can let me know if people are raising their hands. What do you want to know about this community affiliate network? Where is it going? What do you need to do to join? What are the challenges to starting one of these programs? How does it apply to college squash? Anything. We must be doing a good job, panel.
Absolutely. I want to call people out and credit them for innovative work. I don't know, John Patton, if you're willing to share some of your story, but when it comes down to simply putting your head down, putting one foot in front of the other, getting it done and building some momentum, John is one of those people who gets it done in Richmond and took advantage of converting some racquetball courts. I know same thing in Portland. We know people who have started programs by literally building their own back wall for $1,000 that we grant out to start a program in Washington State. So really, the passion and the will is there. And it doesn't need to, as has been pointed out, it doesn't need to start with all bells and whistles going. It's a slow building process, and it can be. And we aren't going to be able to afford to do everything we want all at once. But as I mentioned at the top, this is right in the center of our mission. And so we're very committed to doing everything we can to supporting each community and every community and those leaders within them to bring these programs about.
All right, Kevin, thanks for that comment. While you were speaking, we had a bunch of great questions roll in. Let's go to James Dodson, who's asked a question about college squash. Oh, and then there's John too. And we'll have to get your words too at some point.
So, Barrett, my question was, hi Barrett, hi everybody. Now, just curious, how does it apply to college squash? How would you incorporate and how would you manage to support college programs? I mean, particularly this time.
This isn't the only answer, but I think one answer is colleges aren't going to get rid of courts that are being used by the community. And I think a lot of colleges want to improve their relationships with their surrounding region, but there might be some liability concerns. I think we need to show some some great examples of where it's been successful. Busani Zavo was speaking to me recently and letting me know that this has been happening at Dartmouth for years. In fact, there's homegrown kids from Hanover, New Hampshire playing at Ivies all over the U.S. right now that have been homegrown from weekly clinics in Hanover, and that's not part of the job description as a Dartmouth squash coach. But what an amazing resource when you, instead of having a squash facility dedicated to 18 varsity athletes, to be able to bring the kids from the local community in. So if we can, I think the appetite is for a lot of the college coaches is to be able to facilitate some of these programs to get families in the door. And so I would consider those community affiliates when that day comes. And if a school like Dartmouth was open to it, I'd love to explore that with them, along with the other 40 college programs that we have across the country.
I would add, yeah, go ahead, Renato. Then I want
Sorry.
to add on to that. Go ahead.
Just when I coached at Harvard, Baj started a program called Kid Squash over there, which was, he asked me to kind of, can you do a clinic for anyone that walked through the door? And we put ads on newspapers, say, please come play squash, and we shared the word. And I remember we started the program, I think, with 7 or 8 kids on a Sunday. And my last day that I ran Kid Squash program at the Mercer Center, we had over 70 kids. And it's just with a free hour-and-a-half program. So things like this, it takes only a couple hours of man time, but a lot of energy, which is what we're talking about the college, James. Just open the doors and get people through. That's a great step.
Yeah, and we very much consider sort of activity at college facilities part of the community squash initiative, and being sort of these designations in terms of being a community affiliate. That's why we have a couple levels. I think, Renato, you did say in your opening remarks, it's sinful to have a squash court not being used or to not play squash maybe. But seriously, there are 100 schools out there that have courts but don't have programs. Now, they may only have 2 or 4 courts. However, as we build momentum, making sure we're doing what we can to get activity going on those courts. And many of our most passionate, committed adult squash players are those who were simply introduced to the sport in college. They didn't play varsity college squash. They didn't even play club squash. They got the bug in college, and then when they had the chance to play later in life, they said, I know what that is. I know how great it is. And then they picked up on it and continue to improve as adults, unlike many college squash players who just see a slow, sad decline. So, this kind of activity breeds a lot of enthusiasm, and that's part of this as well. It's a big umbrella.
Yeah, just 2-minute follow on to that.
Hey.
I'm sorry, Chad in Atlanta. I mean, we pre-COVID, we were starting to host the Georgia Tech Squash Club. They have a club team. And I think college squash is one thing, but club squash, and as people mentioned, the other people at those colleges that play squash is a different level of things. They're going to be back in our facility next month when they come back into kind of real school again. But we're fortunate at Georgia Tech, the campus is 1 mile from our facility, and they have 1 court on campus, a converted racquetball court. So, and again, it goes back to the court utilization question. They're going to come late at night or early in the morning or during the day. But more importantly, they see what we're doing in our facility on our urban program, and they're saying, can we volunteer? Can we help the kids in the afternoon? Can we come early, tutor for 30 minutes, and then play squash for 2 hours? So, I mean, I view it, to borrow from golf, all this is about is growing the game and getting it in the future. And anybody that plays squash in a club in Atlanta, in high school, junior high, high school, college, it's going to allow them to step into a community in whatever city they go to work in that may have a squash facility, be it at a fitness center or a club. So that's just a great opportunity for these people to play.
Yeah, mixed use, these mixed uses are so much stronger together, Chad. I think that's one of the things you're getting at. Busani, you had a great question, and also obviously the experience at Dartmouth as well. So I didn't know if you wanted to chime in on the college topic and ask the question that you posed in the chat.
Sure. Yeah, I think I wanted to highlight that there's a lot of there are a lot of colleges that are doing this work, like Renato mentioned. But I think what would be helpful is for that to be publicized so that it's known that this movement has been going on for a long time. But I think, tying to my question, I think where Barrett, you're doing this work authentically. I happen to have started my squash journey in America, in San Diego, 13 years ago, same facility as Renato. And similarly, parents felt like San Diego squash was their home as well. I think there's a piece there that it's not just about the youth. If the families are involved and the families feel like the place is unthreatening to go to every day, all of a sudden you build community. So it's two parts. And that's why I was asking that question. Well, when you and Renato were thinking about your programs, because they're different, did you deliberately think about the families? I could pose that question to you and then to Renato, because I feel like there's a piece, the parents don't fully get what their kids are doing with these white dudes at the courts. But once they see the care and how much of a family they are, then that buy-in changes. And then you've got the kids, the kids feeling involved. But one thing I challenged Tim about, many months ago, I was honest and I said, Tim, I think Urban City is doing an 85% job to the urban city kids. The piece that's missing for me is that why are urban city kids why they're not fulfilling, getting to the level of other kids that are mainstream, based on the resources that urban city squash has. And I think they're addressing it now. So I feel like if the parents have some buy-in, it happens. And so I just like to know what you've done to make the parents buy in, and Renato, the same to you.
Sure. Just to reiterate, there's a lot of different ways to get into this community squash game. In Portland, we've got 10 years, almost 10 years of experience now. And one of our latest realizations, Busani, to your point, is we needed to grow from a youth development organization to a community development organization. And the second that we started thinking of students, not just as students as our program, but members of our whole facility, our kids kept saying second home. And so we wanted that second home feeling, that inclusion that was so powerful with our youth programs, to ripple through our adult community as well. So we do $350,000 of financial aid for our youth programs and another $100,000 of financial aid for our adult membership. And what's happened is that the parents and the families are using this building nonstop now. The kids are coming and soloing. When did students ever get the chance to solo hit? When they only came when we offered transportation. So just that realization that the parents need to be part of this experience. It takes a village to raise a kid, and the parents are an essential part of that. So it was a different way of thinking. Renato, I'll go to you in terms of the way you think of parent engagement.
Yeah, Busani, you were around from the get-go when we were here. You remember that we serve the kids, but the kids go home to a family, and often the discrepancy between the life in a squash club with all these wealthy, often white wealthy people, and they go home to a different world. It was a shocking thing for them. So that came the aha moment. We have to bridge that gap by involving the parents much more. So over here, and I think most of urban squash programs, we visit the homes before we select the students. And that's a crucial part to say, hey, this is not going to be a 1 year or 2 years. We're here for the long run. Our program is a 12-year-long program, and we believe that involving the parents deeply, it's part of the success. So I think one other comment I want to mention is when we were running San Diego Squash, if you remember that well, we were a private club that was utilizing the after school hours for the urban squash program. That was great. But at some point, the power play was a factor. Like, we cannot go longer with the urban squash because the members wanted to play. Currently, we realize here that the structure is much easier, that first of all, more courts was easier, but second, make this equitable and at the same time, so kids can play for longer, members can also play, and we mix those worlds together. That's when the magic happens, including the parents. So one thing we really plan to do in our facility is that once a month on a weekend is an open day of squash. Basically, courts are open all day, everyone plays. No fees, no nothing. So everyone can see the kids getting better, so the parents can watch it. I do believe, Bostani, that's one of the magic recipes for this thing to really work.
Sorry for the background noise here in Portland. We've got one of those misters sanitizing the courts between uses. So we're doing our best to operate right now. I think I'll do a lightning question round since we have some good questions piling up in the chat. I'll just kind of take them one at a time, and we'll see if we have some extra time at the end. I'm going to try to hit on all of them. Brad, you asked the question for Pittsburgh. You all are about to embark on an potentially 8-court facility and maybe even a doubles court in Pittsburgh. Extremely exciting. I'm just skimming this question, but I see some question about marketing. I think one of the first things that US Squash and I'm interested in doing is investing in some marketing collateral to align when we pivot as organizations. One of the best things we can do is put some video content out, put some well thought out marketing materials out that allow you to inspire and align the people around you. So I think marketing materials are going to be one of the first things that come. With that said, we want organizations to join this network because we're going to listen to the needs of the organizations that have made this commitment to access, and we're going to prioritize the investments based on the feedback we get from the different members of this network. So marketing, I think, is one of the first ones, though, because this is kind of it's a new concept. Branding community squash is a new effort, and it needs to be done thoughtfully. Going to Anil. Anil, you're in Miami, if I remember correctly. But in terms of putting squash courts in existing community centers, yes, absolutely. Anywhere that there can be courts. More importantly than courts, though, you need someone that are going to offer these free clinics. I mean, you need the volunteers, and the first people in. I think that got to. I think I saw Robert's point. Can you help us get a program going with local schools? We have the outdoor court in Queens. I'm sure New York Squash would want to help with that because New York Squash has an access task force that's focused on this, but we need operators. We need passionate people that are teaching and spreading the game. Unfortunately, our bench, I don't know how deep the bench is in terms of bringing someone in. Oftentimes it's a local person that is most effective at starting these movements and getting people onto the courts. I'm going to Abby Marco in Baltimore. How do you meaningfully include both SCA program participants and meet the dosage we are aiming for, and also engage community members, lessons, clinics, et cetera, with limited courts? Abby, the great thing is that the programs that we have, whether they be just adult leagues or weekly junior clinics or something as big as the SCA program commitment, they dovetail together so well. In Portland, we actually have junior clinic participants and our SCA students on court at the same time. And SCA students, it's like, I call it choreography. They move into the classrooms while the members are coming into the courts. If you look at the court matrix of a community squash center, it's kind of a beautiful piece of art. I was just reviewing the way they use the courts in Harlem, but they do dovetail together because typically after school is a dead time for a membership program. So it depends which programs you want to include, but oftentimes they're complementary, not rather than competing for court time. Mark Pagan, who's might be working on a project in Nantucket, was asking, is there a minimum size of community for the community affiliate model to work? Absolutely not. I mean, we look for, when I work with a new city, I'm looking for money, leadership, and location. And if you're in a small town, it might be 2 outdoor courts, 1 staff person, and a $50,000 annual budget. If you're in a big region like Atlanta, you might have aspirations of going well beyond that. So definitely not. And we want to share resources, encourage communities of all sizes. I also saw a question from Rohit in Cincinnati, where there's a really amazing partnership where the T, which is a pay-to-play facility, is looking at complementing what Cincinnati Squash Academy's been doing, which is an SEA program. The concept of 2 partners coming together to deliver a mixed-use facility is another really creative way to come into this. And what are the services? I think we haven't fully explored all of them on the website. If you go look at the landing page, there are different benefits depending on which level of affiliate you qualify for. But I will continue to emphasize that I think this is a group, this is a network that you'll enjoy being part of, and you have the full support of US Squash, and SCA will also be a big part of this work as well. So,
Barrett, could I just add a couple of things here?
Please.
Mind? So I just saw Edgardo put up his hand. He wanted to ask a question, but Edgardo was at Street Squash way before I was there, and he was already doing a lot of, well, he was around whilst a lot of these things were happening, whether it was like private schools renting courts or these charter schools having physical education. So he's like, there's also programs that are already doing it. So I think that's another piece to remember, is like there are programs that inherently are doing it like just organically and weren't like branded as such. And I think even like programs like ours, we want to be part of this movement because there's things we are missing too. We don't know it all, right? So like there's stuff we can learn, but I'd be interested to hear what Edgardo has to say, because I think he had his hand up and I didn't know what he wanted to ask. So, but he's been there during this happening, similar to Busani at Dartmouth as well.
Yeah, thank you. I know many of you, but if I don't, I'm Edgardo. I'm a City Squash alum, part of the first class, and currently work at SEA as the director of squash. And I think this is like the next move. I also was a US Squash intern, the first SCA participant to be a US Squash intern. So really, I hope I paved the way for SCA alums to continue to work there. But I think this is like, I've been a part of a bunch of different calls, outdoor squash and bringing like squash, college squash. And I think this is probably going to make the biggest impact in terms of equity and diversity and just bridging these gaps between the squash world. I think there's so many alums within the SCA network that don't have a place to play squash. And that's like disheartening, even for myself. I'm an avid squash player, but I don't belong to a club. I like was mooching off of street squash for about a year. But I think this is just a great opportunity to just bridge these different worlds. I think so many students have a love for squash and it kind of dies if they don't play college squash. And this is just a great opportunity to continue to help them be active and stay healthy, but also being able to share experiences. I think a lot of times like the squash world can seem a bit exclusive, and I think even SAA programs kind of follow the same model at times, but this is just another way to break those barriers. I think my question that I have for Barry is, how do you balance the staffing with an SAA program and having this community affiliate program?
Yeah, in some cases, thank you for that, Edgardo. I remember actually at the SEA conference, I got up and asked the question. I just said, you know, where are students going to play after they graduate? I think that was one of the first times it went off for me, that we've been addressing equity for our students, but we've been promising a sport for life. and we need to deliver on that promise. So thank you for that reminder. And in terms of how you juggle, some organizations split staff between two different entities sometimes. Take Providence, there's 3 different payrolls: Moses Brown, what was Nickel Squash Club, which is Arthur Gaskin's now club, and Squash Busters all have their different payrolls. In Portland, we have everyone on the same payroll, and we actually split people's income depending on the programs that they work on. So we're actually able to deliver our SCA program a little under the national average because we have some synergies, because our squash staff is then able to make money with the membership and private lessons and whatnot. So sometimes you can use staff in that way. Other times it's better to separate, but I'd love to talk to you more about that. There's also a couple questions in the chat about sliding scales and how equity or how access is delivered. I'll just say the way we do it in Portland, we raise money for a scholarship fund, and then we look at the 6 different programs, youth and adult programs that we offer, and we decide how we want to allocate our financial aid across all of those programs. So there's a lot of flexibility, oftentimes a sliding scale, and those mechanics are something that I'm here to work with cities on as they struggle, as they think through how to implement them. I also, before we run out of time, I wanted to go back to John Patton, because we heard Kevin's testimony earlier, but I didn't realize we had John ready on the call. So John, do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience doing the grassroots work in Richmond, I believe?
Oh, more than happy to. I guess I was fortunate that Richmond has kind of a longstanding serious squash community, pretty robust community. But one of the biggest challenges, of course, is to access courts. And so we partnered with the YMCA, raised the money, and converted 3 of their 6 racquetball courts to squash, which is awesome for us, right? You go from 9 courts in the city to 11. I think when we think of the word community here in Richmond, we really think of the word inclusive. Adults, children, it doesn't matter. But it's an intentional kind of diversity, right? You all inclusive, but you still have an intention. And we had an existing kind of urban, I'll call it an urban program. We had a longstanding program that worked with inner city children, but it doesn't have to be exclusively inner city, because I believe when you look at community, kind of good things come from an all-inclusive program. And then you had mentioned Justin, right? So one of the other strategies is to kind of leverage your core competency. Well, 50 miles to the north is another YMCA and a gung-ho guy named Justin Shields. And we did the same thing up there. We cannibalized one of their 3 racquetball courts, which happened to be 1 foot too wide for a racquetball court, and converted it as well. And so now Justin can kind of extend our competency. We can lend our skills to him, and now we've got another market. And to tie into the college piece, down the road is a college that's got a couple of courts, and I would love to kind of do that Mary Kay thing again and roll them in as well, and just have another team working for us. And I think that if our kind of strategy, which I think is very similar to what you're doing, is I think that when you are kind of inclusive, you get multi-generations, parents, children, families, schools, partners, urban. Ultimately, the sport extends, equity flows to those that need the equity from it, and it creates these opportunities that allow you to get things to the next level. And that was our approach. That's
great, John. I'm so glad you were able to show that. We're getting to time. I'll share my two last comments and then send it back over to Kevin. For me, it starts with access, which is just getting our neighbors in the door. And then we can talk about how we distribute resources, to John's point. I call that equity. And then the final goal here is integration, helping friendships and long-term relationships form across lines of difference, which is exactly what our cities and rural communities need right now. And that piece is the ultimate goal for us in Portland, and we're starting to realize it. We're having just amazing community dialogue, and all the friendships are starting to happen. I feel like we're getting past the tipping point, and I'm sure some of you have gotten there as well. And all I can say is it's worth the hard work. It's the ultimate reward seeing community really happen and thrive. Lastly, to Steve Gregg's point, I saw a question come in about how to leverage the local SRAs, and this community affiliate is really focused on facilities first, and getting a group of facilities in this network. This is not going to be the last program in the community initiative. It's just the first. And we need to be thinking about what other programs we're going to need to add to the suite to continue this work beyond the facilities and to the regional networks and to our governance as well. So a lot more to come. I'm so glad everyone could join us for this kickoff, and we'd love to see more programs join the network so that we can plot a path forward and continue this momentum. So thank you, everybody. I'm so glad to be part of it. Kevin, I'll let you end it.
I'll bring it home, or do my best, and try and do it in less than a minute. Appreciate everybody's time. We will host as many of these as is helpful to the entire community. This is really #1 priority for us. And in terms of it being worth the hard work, a lot of us at US Squash put a lot of hard work into the Spectre Center, and we're really excited to make that a real beacon of this type of programming, obviously on a pretty grand scale, but is something that we will walk this talk. And I think it's worth highlighting. We have US Squash board members on this call, young program directors, college coaches, volunteers, entrepreneurs, general managers of clubs, US Squash Hall of Fame members, players, SCA directors. I mean, what that shows me is that A, there's an appetite for this, B, that we can get this done as we bring ourselves together as a community to address what ultimately is an issue. As Simba pointed out, there are a lot of facilities that are doing this type of blended program and have this outlook. We want to shine a spotlight on that. We want to share best practices. We want to build a network. We want to show others how to get it done. And as Chad pointed out from Atlanta, just grow the game. And to Edge's comment, we like to call him Edge. I'm trying to brand Edgardo since he was an intern at US Squash. As Edge pointed out, a big part of this too is really filling in that middle. You have the participants in squash and education. It's a travesty that we're not thinking as a sport to say kids in those programs are part of the squash community. They need a place to play in this sport for life. But also there's this huge middle that we're not addressing. And if we come together, we can address that and build community and everything else. Now's the time to bring it all together. And we're really fortunate to have Barrett and be able to leverage his experience and his leadership and others I want to thank being on the panel as well. And, let's keep the conversation going, and you'll hear more from us as this evolves. Thank you very much. And reach out with any questions and anything else we can do to help you. Really appreciate it, and happy holidays. Take care.